I like to start with just a few photos that I took on the highway to kind of give you a sense of some of the things I saw, and then I'll start talking. One of the themes is the things that we value and what we protect and what we can let go of, because as you guys know especially, we can't keep everything. If you know Ivan Doig's work, this is where he grew up in DePere, Montana. Since automobiles were invented, Americans have been clamoring for better roads, actually since bicycles were invented, because up until that time the roads were pretty much used for commerce and you brought stuff to the county seat. Automobilists wanted to go places for recreation, and this was a new idea in American history. And tourism is about getting people to want to go where you are, which is really important in where I live now in the Gateway Town, the Capitol Reef National Park. But just a little bit on the highway, it is a happy accident that it connects 7 national parks. This was not a plan. The visitation to these parks is about 15 million, and if you add in the other federal areas, you're at about 20 million. One of my favorites is Tumacacori National Historic Site. Their annual visitation is about 40,000, which is what Grand Canyon gets in one weekend in the summertime. It's really a neat place. Don't have room to put all the state parks, of course, and other areas. These are some of the cities that it goes to. I like to say that, the blue are the major waterways. It actually does connect, drain all the way to the Hudson River Valley through the last little bit that leaves Glacier National Park. The highest spot is in Yellowstone, where it crosses the Continental Divide, and about 7,000 feet lower is in Phoenix at 1,100 feet. But what I'd like to say is that it intersects every important western in the history of the United States expansion, from Route 66, the Mormon Battalion, all the way to Lewis and Clark. And if you don't know the story of the Old North Trail, I love this. I'm talking to readers. This is fantastic because, usually when I tell people to go look at a book, I get sort of a look. Anyway, the Old North Trail, the shortest estimate I've heard of this is 5,000 years of human history using this foot trail and later a travoy trail along the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains in Montana, possibly all the way from Alaska through British Columbia and then down to New Mexico. It may be the route that the ancestors of the Navajos, who have a language that's very similar to some of the Canadian Indian languages. Anyway, that's a complete digression, but it's a fascinating story. So if you think of 1916 as the turning point, this is the year that more cars are built in America than wagons. Up until this point, we've got a few national parks. We don't have all of them that end up on the highway. We're still building transcontinental railroads. The Milwaukee Road isn't finished until 1909. But people are buying cars. In 1902, AAA, amalgamation, a club of clubs, American Automobile Club, was established. And the Lincoln Highway is just still struggling along. This is a volunteer effort to build a highway, a coast-to-coast highway, and the goal was to finish it by the 1915 Pan Pacific Expo in San Francisco. And how this road is getting built is community organizations are banding together and saying, okay, next Saturday, it's highway building day. Everybody get your wagons and we're gonna go move some gravel. That was it, because we were having a huge argument as to whose role it was to build these highways. And what happens in 1916 is we have a very liberal federal government at this point, And we see the formation of the National Park Service to take control of these 20 or so national park units and monument units. The other federal agency that gets created at this time is the Bureau of Public Roads, which later becomes the Federal Highway Administration. And the middle class, again, is just pounding on their government officials to build more roads. A 7% solution, I go on to this a lot in the book, but the basic idea is that the final solution for building roads is that the federal government told the states, pick 7% of your mileage of your roads. In the West, we actually got more because they didn't count federal lands, and come up with an interstate map, and the federal government will help fund the building of those roads. And that is sort of the foundation of the numbered highway system. On the left is a public servant who is one of my heroes. This is Chief Thomas McDonald. He actually served for 34 years under 5 presidents. Can you imagine that today as the head of a public agency? And he said that there were 3 great road building programs in human history: the Romans, Napoleon, and the United States in the 1920s. Within days of launching his agency, he managed to transfer over $130 million surplus military equipment from World War I to the states to start doing road building. And it wasn't just trucks. It was shovels and picks that were all brought back from the European theater. And the picture on the right is the first attempt to give money to the states to do road building. So federal money went to the states, and the states were left to their own devices. And you can see that at the Massachusetts-Connecticut border, we're not really cooperating very well. Nothing has changed in a century. So, but this was not really my interest in the beginning. My interest was landscape photography. I was going to be the next Galen Rowell. The highway was Arizona's first highway, and it went through all of the major towns in Arizona, from Nogales through the prison to Flagstaff, and then it stopped and became a county road. And the reason why was that from Flagstaff north to Utah, only Mormons and Indians would use that road, and so they were not going to spend state dollars on that. And it wasn't until McDonald came in with the 7% solution that section from Flagstaff to Kanab was built, and the bridge over Lee's Ferry got erected with mostly Bureau of Indian Affairs money, which is kind of peculiar, but anyway. So Zion and Bryce are really they come into the national park system a little bit later than some of these other parks, and they're really the first parks that are developed primarily for the automobile tourist. The railhead is in Cedar City. It's just not ever going to make it the way it did to Yellowstone or to Grand Canyon, where really the railways implemented most of the tourism infrastructure. There was a really interesting partnership, I don't have time to go on, with the Union Pacific to develop these 2 parks. But they weren't developed for train arriving passengers. They were developed for people who travel pretty much the way we do today. When Horace Albright, the assistant director of the National Park Service, went to Governor Simon Bamberger to ask for convict labor to finish the road that leaves from what's now I-15 into the park, Bamberger pounded on the desk and said, "I will build no more roads to rocks." And you think about that, what we've just been through with the shutdown of trying to get those parks reopened. I think it's fascinating the role that tourism has changed in the last century. The highway runs through Grand Teton, and it's another interesting story about politics and parks and tourism. The Park Service wanted the road, if you've been there, the road to be the road through Jenny Lake, which was the original road, and they were going to continue to collect fees. And part of the grand compromise with the locals to get this park brought into the system was the road that goes straight through Moran, where there are no fees, 1950, because they wanted to be able to keep on going, towards Cody. The first cars were allowed in Yellowstone in 1915. They shared the road with stagecoaches for 2 seasons before they banned the horse-drawn cars. $7.50 of an entry fee. And to put that in perspective, in 1946, it was only $1 to get into the Grand Canyon. And they still had 1,000 cars show up in the first 8 weeks that they let cars into Yellowstone. People really wanted to go to these places. So these are some of the federal areas that are outside the national parks. Sunset Crater Volcanic National Monument. This becomes a monument because there's a Hollywood team that wants to blow this up in 1930 for a film. And the locals said, no, we're not going to do that, and petitioned to have it become a national monument. We are really behind. Yeah. So once you're out there, you start seeing stuff. You see some critters that are kind of interesting. But what kind of happened to me is I started talking to people. First at the overlooks. Hi, where are you from? Pre-marketing my book. And then you got to stop in the little towns in between for refreshment, gasoline. And what I learned in a small town like the one I live in now is that if you want to find out anything, you go to the local convenience store and you see what's on the bulletin board. That is sort of the community. Well, Facebook is changing the face of rural America in that respect. But at this time, which was before Facebook really, you go into a little town and find a convenience store and find out all sorts of interesting things that were going on. And so you end up asking these questions. Where does that highway lead to? This is the Nogales border. You can see the border fence on the lower left, just above there, obviously on the U.S. side. The history of the Spanish conquest of the Arizona area is traced through a route by Father Kino, and his missions, his route becomes the precursor to the highway. Had a great time in Arizona. Tucson has really hung onto their Hispanic heritage in a very interesting way. They have the Mariachi Festival. They do 1,000 kids in a mariachi conference. Their kids learn mariachi the way other kids in schools do marching band. But then you find this overlay of cultures. That's a Hindu god on the door of that Hispanic style house. You guys remember the biosphere? 8 people lived in there for months and months. It's now Arizona University Climate Change, University of Arizona Climate Change Research Program. The first skyscraper in Phoenix, right on Highway 89, running right through town. Remember the big fire in Arizona where the firefighters was killed? I haven't been there since in Yarnell. But I would love to know who's done that artwork. It's definitely taller than me. That was a cold day. There were a lot of cold days. When I teach photography and I tell them what you don't see behind the camera doesn't count, these kids, hey, come stand over here, smoke. Okay. A friend of mine writes Apple software manuals and is a commercial helicopter pilot, and she got me that shot. It wouldn't have happened. Big Rock Candy Mountain in the Sevier Valley. These are all places that deserve to be better known. It's the Mormon Pioneer National Heritage Area Highway. It's sort of a scenic byway, but kind of in a different process, from Kanab to Fairview. And in the book, I talk about that part of Utah's history in that chapter, and then I talk about the overlay of the additional, of later waves of immigrants into Utah in the section that goes from Spanish Fork up to the Idaho border. Sheep, when they know they're going home to winter pasture, run. I ran 2 miles with those sheep. Oh my goodness. That was, and Thistle, the town that never came back. So who knew that we had a Hare Krishna temple in Spanish Fork? Very welcoming to visitors. And we have all sorts of people wanting to tell their stories about their heritage. And the highway on State Street was the site of every important celebration. Important, I worked at the university for years. Important celebration from, you know, the victory in World War II, the Olympics being announced, to football games. This next one's kind of sad. You can't make this picture. That one, I don't know if they're still shrimping out there, but this has been boarded up. It's an old ward house in Idaho. It would be a fantastic B&B, but the owners won't sell it. I met this senior citizen in Paris, Idaho, and I was telling him what I was doing, and he said, our highway goes to Yellowstone, goes to all these parks. So many people said that to me. It's our highway in their little area that they use to get to Walmart and to get to wherever they need to go, the hospital, high school. And the idea that it actually connected them to all of these great places to go wasn't really in their thinking, but it definitely is theirs. They have an ownership of it, and I found that so fascinating. Here's a highway. Yellowstone never relinquished its roads to the Bureau of Public Roads, so the highway actually is unnumbered through Yellowstone. That was a little interagency squabble over that the Park Service won. And once you start heading north in Montana, I know we have somebody here from Montana, but the Crazy Mountains are just spectacular, and nobody's ever heard of them. They're a very peculiar patchwork of private and public land. There were 2 competing routes from Glacier to Yellowstone, the one that goes through Great Falls and the other one that went west, and the one through Great Falls ended up winning in the park-to-park highway map-making project. This next woman has lived 9 summers in this fire tower, watched out over us while we were camping one night, bless her, in the worst fires that I can remember in 2007. So I really had this image of Montana as just being more mountains, and I was shocked and amazed when we came out of the Little Belt Mountains into Great Falls. My husband was with me at the time, and realized that it was actually far western Minnesota. The plains just run right up to the Rocky Mountain front in Choteau. That's David Letterman's ranch area right there. So I saw a lot of really beautiful things. But then I started talking to folks, and this could be a problem. Yeah. And got interested, like I said, in this question of reinventing the West, because you know that her mom was rodeo rider probably, but you know she didn't have a cell phone. All the cowboys have cell phones now. Yes? What does that mean? Oh dear. Well, we're going to have to fly through some of this. I'm not sure how to speed this along. Hang on. We're just going to look at a few more people, and while we do this, I'm going to talk about one of the most important things that I discovered that really pertains to what you guys are doing, which is that I met this guy. I went to go take a picture of the border crossing in Montana, which is not an easy thing to do these days. You send them all your information, your passports and stuff, and then you wait 2 hours at the border crossing while the sunset almost disappears. And while I was there, I was talking to one of the young border agents, and he said he has 5 badges, because he's Border and Customs Patrol, but he's also a structural firefighter. drives an ambulance, he's an EMT, and he's a deputized sheriff. And in my city girl ways at the time, I said to him, what, we don't pay you enough? And he just said, no, there's not enough people out here to do all the work. And I realized that none of the things that, like in this little town, De Puer, they raise all of their community center money in one weekend doing a big sort of pancake breakfast parade kind of thing that just goes on and on that day, and that none of this stuff would happen without the volunteers. And there's some pictures that I would show later, but we're going to wrap this up a little quicker, that aren't in the book of the Rhubarb Festival in Mount Pleasant. Anyone ever make it to the Rhubarb Festival in Mount Pleasant? He's nodding his head. It was fun, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, all the little festivals that you talk about now.
Yeah, we don't do the Rhubarb Festival anymore because we wore out the volunteers. They just got tired. And I live next door to the volunteer fire chief, and I don't want him to get tired because I need him. You know, we need to take care of our volunteers. It's really important. So with that, I think I would rather take questions than go on and on anymore about the highway. Yes, sir.
So approximately how much time, days, months, whatever, have you spent driving this road?
Well, I went to each end 3 times. Arizona is too hot in the summertime when the road through Yellowstone is open, so I never do the whole thing beginning to end. I would always go south, and that's Arizona's tourist season is in the winter anyway, so I would go south in the winter and north in the summer. The book got delayed for a year because of the fires in Montana and the West in 2007. You guys might remember that. It was just terrible. I had a month planned in Montana to do that part of the book, and there were only 3 days I could shoot. So 15,000 miles I drove. I know that. I told that number to the tax man. It's 1,600 miles long, so a lot of days out on the road, but pretty strategic. Like I would know I would want to go to the Hells Angels prison run in Florence, Arizona, which is a very fascinating event. You would think that the town of Florence, Arizona would be thrilled to have 1,000 motorcyclists stop coming. And when Yolanda's Bar, the sponsor, went out of business, the community chamber, like the Chamber of Commerce and those folks got together and went and found another sponsor, because bringing 1,000 motorcyclists, mostly wannabe Hells Angels, but definitely Hells Angels, into town was a big deal for their economic development. That's when I adopted the little costume that I wear, because the place was so thick of, they had every law enforcement in Pinal County at this event, and then there were all the motorcyclists, and I didn't want to look like either crowd, so I ended up wearing my hunting pants, and it worked out okay. They all knew I wasn't the other, and that's all I cared about. Anyone else? Questions? The short answer on how I ended up on Highway 80, not living on Highway 89, which Tori is not, is marital harmony. Bless his heart, you know, he did all those miles, but he never saw a place he wanted to live as much as he does Tori, so we're very happy there. Yes?
What were some of your favorite stretches?
I love the stretch between Great Falls and the southern boundary of Glacier National Park. I think it's totally unknown and just incredibly beautiful. And of course, the part between Kanab and Page was not built until 1957. It was put in order to build the Glen Canyon Dam. I think that is can just be spectacular in the summertime when you've got the big puffy clouds making the light over the rock formations. Events you ought not miss. They hate me telling you this. Christmas Eve at Tumakakori, when the volunteers put luminarias all along the old church there, is just beautiful. There's a woman that's been doing it for 30-some years, getting up crawling around, lighting candles all the way around. The Park Service closes the site early to do that. the elk antler auction in Jackson. It's usually around Mother's Day. This is another community fundraising event. The Boy Scouts go collect the shed antlers and bring them in, and they get auctioned off. Antlers have gone crazy prices because of Asian medicine buyers and fancy chandelier things. So the Scouts don't get to keep all the money anymore. But it's a partnership now with the National Elk Refuge. But it's really fun. They send the littlest kids out with the biggest antlers because they get better prices. The kids are just out there carrying that. And then, what else would I miss? Oh, the quilt walk in Panguitch. That's got some entertainment value. I'm saving those pictures for my new project, which is, I'm going to take part of the Southern Utah chapter and do a project that sort of talks just about Bryce and Zion and Cedar Breaks and that whole tale of how that area got interrupted. But it's mostly going to be what I do, which is fun pictures of cute kids. And let me just see if I can just get to this one picture. So we do this too, put kids on. Our sheep are bigger in Wayne County. It's really scary. I don't know where they get those sheep. And these are, who knew that there were mariachi moms like soccer moms? They don't let the kids take the hats home, and the mom comes in with this big stack of them hanging on. And what I learned was that all the grandparents are out in the audience singing the songs, And this kid, he did not get here without his mom making the costume and without his grandparents teaching him the dance. And this is all about teaching our kids, who we are here in the West. And that's a real privilege to have been able to see. So thank you all.